Translation by Srila Prabhupada. As supplying butter to a fire does not diminish the fire, but instead increases it more and more, the endeavor to stop lusty desires by continual enjoyment can never be successful. In fact, one must voluntarily cease from material desires. Please repeat. As supplying butter to a fire does not diminish the fire, but instead increases it more and more. The endeavor to stop lusty desires by continual enjoyment can never be successful. In fact, one must voluntarily cease from material desires. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. One may have enough money and enough resources to satisfy the senses, but still not be satisfied. For the endeavor to stop lusty desires by enjoying can never be successful. The example given here is very appropriate. One cannot stop a blazing fire by trying to extinguish it with butter. Om Jnana Timrandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Najatu kama kamanam upaboge na samyati havisha Krishna bhartmeva bhuya eva vivardate. As supplying butter to a fire does not diminish the fire, but instead increases it more and more, the endeavor to stop lusty desires by continual enjoyment can never be successful. In fact, one must voluntarily cease from material desires. So, I had a conversation with a devotee a short while ago about this point, because there are two contradictory statements given, one in the last chapter and one in this chapter. So, I'll read the apparently contradictory statement, and then I'd like to discuss that, if that's okay. In chapter 18, King Yayati, he was cursed to suffer from old age, premature old age. But he was given the loophole that if he could get somebody to accept his old age, he could enjoy youth. So he asked his sons. And he asked Yadu, his son Yadu. And Yadu refused for the following reason. Yadu replied, he said, "My dear father, you have already achieved old age, although you are also a young man. But I do not welcome your old age and invalidity, for unless one enjoys material happiness, one cannot attain renunciation." That was Yadu's point, that unless you enjoy material happiness, you can't renounce. And in the purport, Prabhupada says that Maharaj Yadu was very eager to engage himself in the Lord's service, but there was an impediment. During youth, the material desire to enjoy the material senses is certainly present. And unless one fully satisfies these lusty desires in youth, there is a chance of one's being disturbed in rendering service to the Lord. We have actually seen that many sannyasis who accept sannyas prematurely, not having satisfied their material desires, fall down because they are disturbed. Therefore, the general process is to go through grahastha life and vanaprastha life, and finally come to sannyas and devote oneself completely to the service of the Lord. So Prabhupada is saying that unless your lusty desires are satisfied, your material desires, not having satisfied their material desires, people fall down. If you try to renounce before satisfying your material desires, you'll fall down. And Prabhupada said we've actually seen that on many occasions. So, quite often, because the material life is centered around the ego, so because we're habituated to act according to our ego, when we come to spiritual life, we also act according to our ego. And then we get an idea in our head about what it is I think I should be. You know, I want to be this or I want to be that. And Prabhupada gives the example there. He's saying if somebody takes sannyas, takes to sannyas prematurely, on the basis of the ego, then his material desires have not been satisfied and he may fall down. So there's no need for criticism of anybody or, anything like that. What it means is that in spiritual life there's a particular process that has to be followed. And if that process is not followed, then the result won't be as expected. Whereas material life, the process is you take shelter of your ego and you act accordingly. And then you may have success, you may have failure, you may have happiness or distress, whatever. But in spiritual life, the process is a bit different. And we need to search a little bit deeper to try and find out, try and understand exactly what the process is for developing Krishna consciousness. So, the process of Krishna consciousness means to give up material desires. That's the process of Krishna consciousness. Mahaprabhu says, Chaito Darpana Marjanam, Bhava Mahadavagni Nivarpanam. The first thing he says in the Shikshastakam is that you have to cleanse the mirror of the mind, which means that the soul is already pure. The soul is always pure, but at the moment we're covered over by Maya, by illusion. And that illusion takes the form of different types of anarthas. And one of those anarthas is material desire. So because of material desires, our consciousness is covered over and we're not aware of our relationship with Krishna. We're not aware of our spiritual existence. So to make advancement in Krishna consciousness, it doesn't mean you have to become an advanced devotee, because we are in our svarup, in our natural position, we are advanced devotees. We're pure devotees. But at the moment, somehow, for some reason, and different acharyas give different reasons, but for some reason, we're covered over by Maya. So the process of Krishna consciousness is to uncover ourselves, is to become cleansed from material desires. So that's the whole point, is to become free from material desires. Now, the point in this verse is that Maharaj Yayati is making the point that by continual enjoyment, you can never become free from lusty desires. By continuing to try to enjoy. And Yadu has already said that unless you enjoy, you won't become free from lusty desires. So that's the apparent contradiction. Is that one person is saying that without enjoying sufficiently, you won't be able to become free from your desires. And the other person is saying that if you keep enjoying, you'll never become free from material desires. So there's a small problem. You have to look a little deeper for the answer to it. And what Maharaj Yayati is saying here is a common, anybody can see in this world that people don't become free from material desires by enjoying. There's one friend of mine, my wife's cousin actually, she's a pharmacist, and she said she's become disgusted by seeing elderly Indian men come into the pharmacy with prescriptions for Viagra. And if anybody doesn't know what Viagra is, it's a tablet where if a person's body is not capable of enjoying, then you can take this tablet and it gives you some vigor to enjoy. So we can see that they spent their whole life enjoying. And in old age, when the body doesn't function anymore, the mind is still pushing for enjoyment. So they develop a pill. That's a modern life, isn't it? Take a tablet for everything. So you have a magic tablet that makes your body able to enjoy again. So you can see in the world, there's no... material desires don't become dissipated by enjoying. The more you enjoy, the more desires you get. So then what do? We all renounce and we try and give everything up. And then we find that we can't give everything up because we haven't satisfied properly. We haven't enjoyed properly. So there's a way to enjoy, is the point. There's a way to enjoy. And the way to enjoy is given by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, text 47, which is called the Chatur Karma Sutra in the Bhagavad Gita. There's 4 sutras describing karma. Karmanye vadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala heturbur mate sangostva karmani. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you're not entitled to the fruits of action. Never consider yourself to be the cause of the results of your activities, and never be attached to not doing your duty. So the understanding is that we all have a thing called adhikar. Adhikar means qualification. So Prabhupada says, he calls it a right. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty. So it's understood in 2 ways. One way is that you can't, if someone has a right to do something, then you can't obstruct that person. It's wrong of you to obstruct that person, because I have a right to act like this. According to our nature, we have a right to act in a certain way. Arjuna's nature was that he was a Kshatriya. So he had a right to act, a right to fight and kill people. But there's also another side to it, which means you have an obligation to do that thing, which was Krishna's point to Arjuna, that because he's a Kshatriya, he had an obligation to fight. So the point is that we all have a particular nature. We're born with a particular nature in this world. And according to that nature, the body has to act in a certain way. And if we try to stop the body acting in the way it's supposed to act, or if we try to force the body to act in a way it's not supposed to act, then there's problems. There's problems. So Maharaj Yadu's point was that unless you enjoy properly in youth, your desires won't be dissipated. You won't be able to renounce. So that means that according to our nature, we have to act in a certain way. But how do we act? In what way do we act? Ma phaleshu kadachana. You're not entitled to the fruits of action. That means you can't be attached one way or the other. We're not acting for a profit. We're not trying to act for profit. We're trying to act according to Dharma, according to what is our proper method. According to Guru Sadhu Shastra, we take guidance on how to act, and we do the right thing at the right time. So, karma means you do a thing to try and get a profit. Karma yoga means you perform activities to try and become free from bondage. So the motivation is different. Ma karma phala hetu bhur means never consider yourself to be the cause of the results of your activities. Which means that Krishna has a universal form. The universe is the form of Krishna. So because of our false ego, we're claiming that one particular part of Krishna's universal form is me, namely this body. So when we see Krishna's universal form acting, we see this body acting, we're under the illusion that I am acting. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. That I'm thinking that I'm the doer. Because of false ego, I see the body acting and I think I'm the doer. But actually Krishna is saying that you shouldn't, in order to do karma yoga, we should give up the idea that I'm doing. We should adopt the idea that everything's going on by the will of the Supreme. And then mate sangos to akarmani. The flip side of it, you should not become attached to not doing your duty. So you have to act according to your conditioning. And if we act according to our conditioning, without attachment and aversion, then we'll find that we'll enjoy properly, and after enjoyment, the desires will dissolve, the desires will go. So in the sense that we have material desires, so we have to enjoy to dissipate the material desires. But karma, material activities means that as we enjoy, more desires are coming, or else those desires are solidifying, they're becoming stronger more and more. Like for example, if you take a teenager who's just started drinking alcohol and you tell him to give up alcohol, he can give it up easier than a person who's been drinking alcohol for 40 years. Because the desire is more solidified. The more you act, the more solidified it becomes. But the trick of karma yoga is that by enjoying, that desire doesn't solidify, that desire goes. So there's a great art to work. There's a great art of work in this world called karma yoga. And Prabhupada translates karma yoga as devotional service. Because sometimes people say, oh, I don't do karma yoga or jnana yoga, I do bhakti yoga. As if bhakti yoga doesn't include all the other limbs of yoga. So, devotional service in practice means karma yoga. So, the point I'm trying to make is that in order to dissipate desires, we have to act properly. We have to follow the principles of karma yoga. So what does that mean for us then? What does that mean for us? It means that while we're doing our sadhana, while we're practicing Krishna consciousness, it's not a matter of just following the rules and regulations of devotional service, because, there's rules and regulations. You get up early, you chant the holy names, 10 Mangalarti. There's so many rules and regulations to follow. And then we start to think, well, I'm following the rules and regulations, so I make an advancement. But if we have that attitude, we can fall into what's called niyamagraha. It means you're following the rules and regulations, but you're not doing it properly. Because in order to practice sadhana properly, we have to have an internal cultivation. Actually, we have to have an internal cultivation. So there's a book that Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote called Sri Bhajan Rahasya, which is a description of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's sadhana. And when I saw the book first, I thought, oh, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's sadhana. So you think that it'd be like, I get up at 3 o'clock, and then I chant for half an hour, and then I do this, and then I do that, and then I write some books or whatever. But there's nothing like that in it at all. There's nothing like that at all in it. Because sadhana, that's not sadhana. That's the very beginning. That's the first thing you get taught when you come through the door. And that's the very beginning of sadhana. But actual sadhana is a completely different thing. It is totally different than just following the rules and regulations. So if somebody wants to be called a sadhaka, someone who's practicing sadhana, bhakti, there's a lot more to it than just following the rules. There's a lot more to it. And there's an introduction by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And he says that the Sri Bhajan Rahasya, it was compiled by Srimad Bhaktivinoda Thakur. In the form of this book, he has given a hint of his own method of bhajan, so that his sincere followers may have a guideline. A few years before, this Akinchana, referring to himself, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he carefully observed him reciting the slokas mentioned in this book, and at the same time he was relishing overwhelming ecstatic love of Godhead. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur is a personality who we accept is situated in ecstatic love of God, Krishna Prem. And there's a system for going from Shraddha to Prema. Shraddha means the very beginning of Krishna consciousness. And Prema means transcendental ecstatic love of God. So there are many pitfalls between the beginning and the end. And we all fall into these pitfalls all the time. So we have to be very careful. We have to tread carefully, basically, if we want to attain the destination. A huge amount of people actually are unaware of the actual destination, and a huge amount of devotees also are not interested in the destination, you find from talking to devotees. Like there's a mood, again, it's just an observation. There's a mood that we just do the mission, we just push the mission, and then we go back to Godhead afterwards. We don't have to do any cultivation, and all this talk of developing Krishna Prema is some kind of, Sahajaism or something like that. There's this kind of attitude I've seen myself. I don't know if anyone else has not seen that. But the point is, Prabhupada's mission is not just to do stuff. It's not just to do stuff and get results and get big scores and get loads of numbers and all this type of thing. Prabhupada's mission, he came to the Western world to distribute Krishna consciousness. He came to rescue conditioned souls from the mire of material illusion and re-establish them in loving service to Krishna. That's Prabhupada's mission. And if we want to be part of Prabhupada's mission, that means we have to develop Krishna consciousness. Because we're the mercy cases. You know, we're not exactly the ones who have to go out and give the mercy to everyone else. We're the ones who have to get some mercy and try and make some advancement. And the way we get mercy is also to try and spread the movement. So the two things are combined. But Prabhupada says in the purport to Bhagavad Gita, chapter 5, text 25. 26. The translation is, those who are beyond the dualities that arise from doubts, whose minds are engaged within, who are always busy working for the welfare of all living beings, and who are free from all sins, achieve liberation in the Supreme. And there's one line in the verse that says, Sarva Bhuta Hite Rataha, means engaged in welfare work for all living entities. It's chapter 5, text 25. Engaged in welfare work for all living entities. So there's two things in Sanskrit. One's called hitam and one's called priyam. And both of them mean doing good for other people. But there's a good example to describe the difference. Let's say somebody has... what's the thing where you can't take sugar? Diabetes. Someone has diabetes. But they love chocolate. So they come and say, oh, give me some chocolate. Priyam means to give him chocolate and see that he becomes happy. Hitam means to not give him chocolate, because then he'll be happy in a better way. Long-term happy. Yeah. So priyam means to let your children sit in front of the telly all day because that's what they want to do. And hitam means to give them some good engagement in Krishna consciousness. And in the purport, Prabhupada says, only a person who is fully in Krishna consciousness can be said to be engaged in welfare work for all living entities. When a person is actually in the knowledge that Krishna is the fountainhead of everything, then when he acts in that spirit, he acts for everyone. The sufferings of humanity are due to forgetfulness of Krishna as the supreme enjoyer, the supreme proprietor, and the supreme friend. Therefore, to act to revive this consciousness within the entire human society is the highest welfare work. One cannot be engaged in such first-class welfare work without being liberated in the Supreme. So you can't be engaged in first-class welfare work, namely distributing Krishna consciousness, unless you're liberated in the Supreme. So then what do we do when we go on Harinam or book distribution? We're not supposed to have the attitude that we're going out to liberate all the conditioned souls, actually. We're not supposed to have that attitude, because that's a slightly buffed up mentality, thinking that I'm the one who can rescue these people. Actually, what we're doing is following the instructions of the spiritual master. The spiritual master has said, go and do that. So therefore we go and do it. So the result is not mine. The success or failure is not mine to, claim. The success or failure belongs to the spiritual master. So, that was the point. Was the mission, Prabhupada's mission. To engage in Prabhupada's mission means to try and cultivate Krishna consciousness. We should know very clearly what the goal is. We should know what the goal is. And the goal is to develop ecstatic love of God. There's Krishna Prema is the goal. And it's a very high goal and it seems very far away. But nonetheless, we should know that is the goal. And we shouldn't be just thinking that, we just get stuck into the mission and rah, 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 and all that. Because unless we have the proper inner cultivation, then we won't make advancement. Without the proper inner cultivation of practicing Krishna consciousness with the principles of karma yoga, with the principles of detachment and surrender to Krishna, with the understanding that I'm trying to become free, I'm acting out my material desires to try and become free from my material desires. Without that understanding, then we won't make any advancement, and we'll find ourselves in 40, 50 years' time thinking, I've been chanting Hare Krishna for most of my, if not all my adult life, and I haven't made any advancement. Because the externals might be there, but if the internals are not there, then the result won't come. And all of the acharyas, all their books are, they're pointing towards this type of thing. So, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur continues, in the kingdom of bhakti, there is a provision for archana for those who have nishta at the level of kanishta. So it's a bit technical. He's talking about worship. In the kingdom of bhakti, there is provision for archana. Archan means worship. For those who have nishta at the level of kanishta. So you may be a kanishta adhikari, but you have some nishta. I'll come to that. What is nishta? Yeah. Nishta means fixed. But nishta at the level of kanishta means you haven't got such a massive depth of realization, but you're doing it every day. You're here, you're chanting your rounds every day, and you're following the process. You're kind of steady in your sadhana, but you don't have the depth of realization yet. So there's a provision for archana, which means there's a method for worshipping Krishna. Then he says, the difference that exists between archana and bhajan is sometimes difficult to follow for many people. That is why they misunderstand the word archana as bhajan. So archan means worship, and bhajan means bhajan. But Prabhupada says in the Bhagavad Gita purports that it's difficult to translate the word bhajan into English, so sometimes it's translated as worship. And he gives the example that sometimes one may fail to worship a materially powerful personality and be called discourteous, I think is the word he uses. But if one neglects to worship the Supreme Lord, he is utterly condemned. So he's trying to explain what bhajan means. And so, for want of a better word, bhajan means worship. But archana also means worship. And there's a difference. He says, while worshipping the Supreme Lord by archana, one is bound by a feeling of reverence mixed with awe and submission. To serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead with a mood of awe and submission, along with various paraphernalia, is known as archana. Now, then he says, while revealing the secrets of bhajan, so that means that basically you have a mood of awe and reverence, and you're using different material paraphernalia to worship the Supreme. It's been narrated in this book that in the process of archana, there more or less remains a connection with the gross and subtle bodies. There more or less remains a connection with the gross and subtle bodies. In the realm of bhajan, the embodied soul, freed from gross and subtle designations, is directly engaged in the service of the Supreme Personality. One who is sincerely engaged in bhajan and who is completely freed from all material designations realizes through his spiritual senses something beyond the material sphere. So, like he says, it's a little difficult to understand. What it means is, if you worship with a conception that I am this body, that's called archana. If you worship Krishna on a platform where you're not influenced by the body and the mind anymore, that's called bhajan. That's called bhajan. If that makes any sense. So, in our life, we're obsessed with the mind and we're obsessed with the body. So we have to come to a level beyond the body and the mind. And then that's called being engaged in bhajan. Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda Ki Jai. And then the word rahasya is translated, it goes into it, it's a whole thing, but basically rahasya means prema, means Krishna prema. So Sri Bhajan rahasya means the method of worshipping Krishna in order to transcend the material body and the mind and be situated on the platform of Krishna Prem. That's what the title of the book means. Simple. So, he's analysed, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is analysed in here, it's called Ashtayama Sadhana, which means the day is broken up into 8 sections of 3 hours. Each one is called a yama. So there's 3 yamas at night, 3 in the day, 1 at dawn, 1 at dusk, which means 8 yamas, which means 24 hours. And he also correlates that with the 8 verses of the Shikshastakam. And he gives a description of sadhana bhakti, starting with Shraddha and culminating with prema. And each stage corresponds with a different verse of the Shikshastakam. So Shraddha means Chaito Darpanam Arjanam, Bhava Mahadavagni Nivarpanam, Shreya Kariva Chandrika Vataranam, Vidyavadu Jivanam, Anandam Buddhibardhanam, Pratipatam Purnam Ritasvadanam, Sarvatma Snapanam Paramajayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam. That verse means Shraddha. It means there's various glorifications to give us the faith that we should chant the holy name. All glories to Sri Krishna Sankirtan, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years together, extinguishes the fire of repeated birth and death. So, the idea is that we're supposed to become inspired by that verse to take shelter of the holy names. Take shelter of the holy names. Now, once we've taken shelter of the holy names, then the next verse, Nam Namakari Bahuda Nija Sarva Shaktish Tatrapatani Amataha Smaranena Kala. Etadrashi Tavakripa Bhagavan Mamapi Durdeva Midrisha Mahajani Nanuragaha. Describes the process of anartha nivritti. So, anartha nivritti means all the obstacles to our Krishna consciousness. So, to try and make the connection, the anartha nivritti described in this verse means what's being discussed in today's shloka. That's the kind of mindset, because we're talking about being overcome by material desires, and we're talking about trying to overcome material desires. So material desires are one of the 4 types of anartha, one of the 4 types of obstacles, and there's 4 types of material desires, and it's all explained in depth in the book, and it takes a long time, but the point being, the question is raised, why have I not attained attachment for chanting the holy names? He says, My Lord, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, in your holy name there is all good fortune for the living entities, and therefore you have many names, such as Krishna and Govinda, by which you expand yourself. You have invested all your potencies in those names, and there are no hard and fast rules for remembering them. My dear Lord, although you bestow such mercy upon the fallen conditioned souls by liberally teaching your holy names, I am so unfortunate that I commit offences while chanting the holy name, and therefore I do not achieve attachment for chanting. That's Prabhupada's translation from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So, we don't have an attachment for chanting the holy name. Now, we have some taste for chanting the holy name. Everyone has some taste, otherwise they wouldn't practice. But that taste is not ruchi. It's not taste, actually. Because the taste that we have comes from disciplining ourselves to engage in chanting. So when we discipline ourselves and we say, I'm going to chant my rounds every day, then we get a taste for chanting. But ruchi, an actual taste for chanting, means you don't have to discipline yourself anymore, because you're chanting because of the taste. We're chanting because of, we're trying to habituate ourselves to chant. And because of that, we're getting some taste. But ruchi means the taste is so strong. In Madhurya Kandamini it describes that ruchi means that when a person has significantly more taste for practicing devotional service than from anything else in his life, that's called ruchi. So that taste is what pushes him in chanting. So when it says we don't have a taste for chanting, that's what it means. We don't have that taste. We can say, I have a taste for chanting, and then we all think we're very advanced. But actually, ruchi means you don't stop chanting anymore. You're motivated by an inner desire for Krishna consciousness. So we don't have that taste. And why do we not have that taste? It's because devena te hatadiyo. This is like one of the focal point of that verse. It's called devena, durdevam, idrisha mahajani nanuragaha. Durdevam, Prabhupada says, by fate of misfortune, there's a verse in the Bhagavatam, by fate of misfortune, we've turned our face away from Krishna and we're engaging our senses in sense gratification instead of engaging in Krishna's service. Just like when we come to class and we start discussing the process of bhakti yoga, it becomes really boring and people start falling asleep. Because our taste our senses are directed towards material life. Our senses are not directed towards spiritual life. So when you start talking about spiritual life directly, then it's difficult to concentrate. And the reason why that is so is because of Devam, which means there's a higher power acting upon us, which is causing us to engage in the service of Maya, essentially. That's the point of the thing. And in order to become free from our predicament, free from the suffering of material life, we also have to take shelter of a higher power to become free. So we become bound up in the material world because of Maya, a higher power called Maya, and we have to become free from material entanglement by Krishna's mercy. So the point is, in order to engage in anartha nivritti, in order to remove all the anarthas, we have to have the proper attitude. And the proper attitude is not that I'm going to go out and I'm going to save the world and I'm going to bash and I'm going to do it all. The proper attitude is that, Prabhupada gave the example of a prisoner. I'm in prison. And I'm not in prison, I'm not in this material body out of choice. The same way a prisoner doesn't go to prison because of choice. He's forced to go to prison. Somebody else is making him go to prison. So we have to accept the fact that somebody else has forced us into this situation. And for the prisoner to become released from prison, somebody else has to release him. Can be granted a pardon by the king or the president. Alternatively, if he behaves himself nicely, he can be released when his term of imprisonment is over. But if he continues his activities, like if he gets into prison, he's in prison for something, and then he gets there and he gets involved in all kinds of violence and drug dealing, they'll keep increasing his prison term. So that's our position. Because we're increasing our material activities, we're increasing our prison, our sentence. And there's no way out from this prison, the prison of the material world, except by Krishna's mercy. It has to come through Kripa. It has to come through Kripa. However, and Krishna's mercy comes through the holy names. We have to take shelter of the holy names. Now, while chanting the holy names, Bhaktivinoda Thakur describes, he says, even if one can give up all material desires, the desire for fame, which is called pratishta, the desire for fame is very difficult to give up. This desire for fame, which is compared to stool, is the root cause of all anarthas. The desire for fame is the root cause of all anarthas. So fame, pratishta, doesn't just mean you want to be on stage singing a song with massive audience looking at you. Pratishta means you want acceptance. You want recognition. Not just recognition, look at me. That's a real gross manifestation of pratishta. Look how brilliant I am. I've been a devotee for however long and I'm so brilliant. That's a real gross manifestation of pratishta. But there's a more subtle manifestation of pratishta, which is this desire to be accepted in society. So Rupa Goswami says we have to give up the desire for society, friendship and love. Because for society, friendship and love is centered around pratishta. It's centered around a desire for acceptance, a desire for recognition, maybe not in such a big puffed up way, but we want people's approval, in other words. So this desire for approval is a root cause of all anarthas, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says. And how can we get free from anarthas? It's not possible to get free by our own endeavour. We have to be set free by a higher power. However, one can easily progress by accepting the path given by the Mahajans. One who acts according to his own ideas will meet with disturbance and ruin. If one makes no effort to become free from anarthas, then he will meet with misfortune, being unable to receive the mercy of the holy name. So if we want to get the mercy of the holy name, we have to make an effort to become free from anarthas. Without receiving the mercy of the holy name, one will be unable to remove his anarthas despite repeated attempts. So you can't get free. Without getting the mercy of the holy name, you can't get free from anarthas. But you can't get the mercy of the holy name unless you try to get free from anarthas. So Prabhupada said in purport Bhagavad Gita, God helps those who help themselves. And he gave the example of the sparrow, wasn't it, who was helped by Garuda. I think everyone knows that story. So if we make the effort, then Krishna will help. And if we make the effort, then we can take shelter of the holy names. We can get the mercy of the holy name. Without receiving the mercy of the holy name, one will be unable to remove his anarthas, despite repeated attempts. But if one cries sincerely at the lotus feet of the name, then within a few days all anarthas will vanish. A few days. So if we cry sincerely at the lotus feet of the holy name, then we'll be free from all anarthas by Thursday. A few days. And then he says, after giving up anarthas, one should fully engage in hearing and chanting, taking complete shelter of the holy name. So the point I was trying to make was that material desires are an impediment to our development of love of Krishna. And the goal of the Krishna consciousness movement is that we develop love of Krishna. So therefore it follows that we should try and give up material desires. And the way to give up material desires is to study closely what is a material desire, and study all the different varieties of desires, and do our best to give them up. But we should know that it's not in our capacity to give them up. So there's no need to become puffed up about it. We're trying, and Krishna's helping. That's the point I was trying to make.